Welcome, everybody, to episode number 39 of the Digital Climax Kings. I'm the Dead On Leprechaun, joined by Digital Prophet. Say hello, brother.
Profits in the house.
What's up?
Just steadily enjoying another 100-degree day in Texas.
Yeah, so what's the situation with that drought?
It's not looking good at all, Lep. I just found out earlier that there is a panic sale going on amongst the cattle ranchers, which makes sense because it's so dry out here. I haven't had to mow the lawn in 2 months. The cows have no food, so they can't keep them alive. They got to get rid of them. They're a liability now, and it's terrifying.
What? That's
I love
terrible.
a good cheeseburger and I love a good ribeye and I like cows.
Yeah, I couldn't live without my beef. I love me some steak. I love me some prime rib is good. I mean, it's all good. I love me some basic old hamburger, even.
It's not discount milk. Leche goes a long way.
True that. Yeah, there ain't enough venison out there to feed us.
So it's unprecedented. It's a 1200-year drought I'm hearing. Lep, every day I feel like I'm becoming even more desensitized to the next catastrophe. There was a fire down the street from where I'm at right now yesterday, and it wasn't big, but it was just another sign of this drought and just this current economy. The current state of the world can kind of be summed up by Texas weather right now. It's real hot.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we're having a pretty warm summer up here in Minnesota too. I mean, it's not anything compared to what you guys are going through, but it's been unusually hot.
Well, it seems like Europe's getting it even worse.
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that one. I've been seeing some conflicting reports, like where they're showing the same weather forecast for the same news station. Everything was all verbatim except for the year was
Oh, wow.
2 or 3 years ago, and the temperatures are within 2 or 3 degrees of the same day. However, 2 years or 3 years ago. So I don't know if that's true or if that's just more propaganda, but it's no secret that all the news stations have sort of been on a kick lately to push this climate crisis right down our throats, regardless of the other issues, inflation, some of the other problems that we're having, droughts, fires, all these things that are happening. And keep in mind, we haven't even had a really big hurricane this year.
Lep, you throw out climate change, but I went down a rabbit hole over a decade ago regarding a peace treaty that was signed, I believe, with Reagan when Reagan was in office,
Yeah.
regarding the use of weaponizing the weather. And they actually had patents out for the technology. There's been shows documenting potential technology that's able to do that. And it's just something that makes you go,
Yeah. So what do you think that looks like? I mean, how would they affect the weather in a way that's, I mean, do you think it's what we're experiencing now, or do you think it's,
Well, if you go down the rabbit hole and watch the hours and hours of compiled footage that I have watched, you will learn that there's systems set up throughout the world containing giant like antennas. There's one up in Alaska called the HARP, High Auroral Research Project or something like that.
okay?
Jesse Ventura, former governor of Minnesota, tried to take a camera crew up there and get some footage. They were immediately shooed away by the powers that be, but they're saying that they're using those to beam gigawatts of electricity into the ionosphere. It ricochets back down to the Earth's surface, causing increased temperatures in specified spots, giving them the power to control hurricanes and basically manipulate the weather.
Wow.
Yeah, very interesting stuff out there that, we're not taught in high school.
I mean, if that's real, that's terrifying. I mean, I really hope for our sake that that isn't real, but I mean, who knows at this point? China and some of these other huge powers could do pretty much whatever they want, and we would, you wouldn't know until it's too late,
That's the scary thing. And now, how do you even validate any such truth using the technology we have that's so censored?
right?
It
Yeah.
could lead you down the wrong rabbit hole very easily.
Well, that's just it. I mean, it's. there's a lot of things that are beyond our control as it is, and I think most people just think that it's unrealistic, and I don't even know if they believe, seeing evidence, even if the mainstream news was pushing it as a story. I don't know if people would believe it.
You're hitting on something with especially like the TikTok type apps where we're getting shown these just ridiculous 15-second clips, over and over, and it's desensitizing us in more ways than one.
It's true.
How many alien footage clips do you see on a given day now? I mean, I subscribe to a lot of that stuff because it's just, interesting to look at, but to me, it's all kind of like, yeah, Photoshop, probably isn't real.
Yeah, did you watch the alien autopsy from way back in the day?
Probably, maybe.
Where they supposedly, like, some troops basically came across it was an Area 51, conspiracy theory, we'll call it, where they supposedly captured a spacecraft, and then these little men, and then they had this kind of pseudo like autopsy that they performed. The guy that does that weird show, like, I forget what it's called. They have a place in Florida. It's like, can you believe that, or something. But anyway, the show essentially, it was fairly well done for back then. But this guy, was showing this footage that looked, at the time, this was probably the late 90s, early 2000s, when, they released it to the general public anyway. And they had, people that supposedly were working at the base at the time that were confirming it was true. And then they had, the opposite point of view, people that were saying that it wasn't possible, that they were there, that they would know, the normal, like, naysayers were trying to say that it just wasn't possible, didn't happen, that kind of thing. But it really gets you wondering, like, even if everything was true, like, I don't know if people would even believe that, like, we're so polarized at this point. I think aliens would be used as propaganda just like anything else, and people would choose whether or not to believe it's true, even if they were talking to an alien.
Yeah, I mean, who knows, being that history, as famously quoted by Napoleon, I believe, is written by the victor,
Right.
So what we're hearing could be a complete fabricated story just to get us to fall into a certain agenda.
It's very possible. I mean, like you said, it's just one of those things where, because the history is written by the victor, you're only going to hear the side of the story that they wanted you to know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. There's so many things going on at one time that it's hard to, pinpoint any one story. It seems like the news cycle, because of the 24-hour, cycle, essentially there's just such a push to move on to tomorrow's story that I don't think anything can even gain traction, because people just don't care. It's like they care about whether or not they can buy groceries. They care about whether or not, the catalytic converter on their car is going to get stolen. I was today just had my car sitting in the driveway, in a fairly decent neighborhood in Minnesota, but there was some kids walking by on their bicycles. It gave me a second looking at the car running. I was 30 feet away in my garage, but they had that immediate, that snap turn head, motion, where you're just like, oh, I guess I'm gonna go move my car into the garage right now, rather than finish what I was doing first. Like, it's just, people just don't trust each other. We were talking about this before the stream, that there's this unusual tension in the air that everyone seems to have right now.
You might have seen it. There was a headline earlier: an entire police force resigned. I believe it was in North Carolina. I watched the video. Now, granted, the police force was, I think, six troopers large, and they didn't seem to be the sharpest tools in the shed. But that, I mean, that could become something that starts happening, like the defund the police movement gets their wish, and all of a sudden, then like chaos would really break out.
Yeah, and I don't even know what we'd do to stop it when the police are turning their backs, and rightfully so. There's been that agenda and narrative for a couple of years now, since the protests, to defund them and demoralize them. That with what happened in Uvalde, I think it's pretty clear at this point that the police are not going to go above and beyond any longer.
Very scary thoughts.
Yeah, make sure you got the means to protect yourself is the advice I have for everybody. Is you
Well,
should.
you mentioned narratives that were being fed, and I find it interesting that they're like blunt or blatantly trying to confuse the public about what a recession actually is. And so
Yeah,
we've got these numbers coming out, I believe, tomorrow, right, by the Fed. There's new interest hikes, which I think that qualifies us as being in a recession. Am I correct?
yeah, they're trying to change the definition of what a recession is right now. Like you said,
Hmm.
it's it's unbelievable that we would. It's like playing a game with somebody who keeps changing the rules. Like saying, no, I didn't say that. No, I didn't say this. No, we're playing by this rule. Like it's moving the goalposts. That's the best way to put it. And
It's like the powers that be are falsifying reality
yeah,
in our faces, and most of us are just wanting and dying to hear something positive, so we're going to cling to whatever is positive.
for sure. And I see it all the time, on Facebook and Twitter and everywhere. People are touting these record jobs numbers, of low unemployment, which those numbers are cooked. Those numbers are totally different now than what they were 10 years ago, 5 years ago. They don't factor in the people that fell off, unemployment. They don't factor in people that, left the workforce altogether. They stopped looking for employment. I mean, those numbers are just so incredibly manipulated that I don't know how anybody can look at that and say this is good news when you're filling your gas, paying for gas at the gas station, what was $50 is now $100. I mean, everybody's feeling it. I mean, but again, like you said, there's such a push to want to be positive and to want to see, the greener grass that everybody's just letting it go and hoping that if they keep their head down, keep working, that things will get better for them. And maybe that's true, but I think that nobody's going to save us. We're going to have to save ourselves.
Yeah. That's kind of like the mindset I had today just as I was working. I was kind of in my mind reminiscing about how I used to play RPG games like Zelda and Final Fantasy. And in those games, you walk around as your character and you build up experience and you defeat bigger and bigger enemies as the game goes by. And it just seems like so many people have been living in this country, at least for the last 20 years, like on the high horse, but not really gaining any real experience if they were to go on like self-sustaining mission. You know what I'm saying? Like all of a sudden they can't rely on police officers or stores for food or electrical grid for power. What are you gonna do? We've been talking about this since the show began, survival skills, but now it's becoming more of a, it's really coming down to the end of the road for this riding for free crowd. I mean, we're seeing it everywhere. The major cities are collapsing. People are living more and more paycheck to paycheck. Credit cards are maxed out.
It's looking pretty scary to say the least. I think for most middle class people, for most people that have always lived sort of paycheck to paycheck, maybe a little more cushion than that. I think people are running out of savings, like you said. The credit cards are getting close to their limits. People are obviously not buying houses. Housing applications are at the lowest that they've been in, I forget, maybe a year or two now. And people are really pulling back and tightening up the belts. And I don't know what this winter is going to look like, especially in the Midwest. A state like Minnesota, we're going to have a really nasty winter, I think, as far as cold temperatures. And I think the price of heating oil for folks, well, heating oil, propane, and natural gas is already crazy insane. And even if it went down by a few cents, I think the days of $2 gas are just gone for good. I don't think they're ever coming back, regardless of who's in the White House, regardless of who we elect. I think those days are just gone, and people are going to have to do more, work 2, 3 jobs forever. I don't think that retirement is a thing for many, many people, my family included.
Right? And that's kind of like a new thing. Didn't the American dream create that whole idea of being able to retire at a certain age and rely on Social Security?
Yeah, and Social Security is predicted to be out in 10 years, and then with the increases with inflation, there are some bumps that people get. My mom is on Social Security. She's 81 years old, and she gets, fixed income that's going to be going up, I think, 8 or 9% this year for the first time. It's went up, that big of a bump that she's gotten. But I mean, it is not keeping up with actual inflation. I mean, that these people are, like you said, they got to go back to work. They got to go back to figuring out a way to struggle and get by, because that Social Security safety net that they banked on their whole life, paid into their whole life, is now not that safety net that they thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to make people very angry.
And you know what? I was just listening to a guy talk about from an entrepreneurial standpoint how it's so much more affordable to spend $20,000 or $30,000 on an automated kiosk and put it in a popular mall, opposed to the typical way where you pay a worker that doesn't really have any skill set except sitting in front of a cash register all day at the mall. So now, like, these lower tiered, lower skill set jobs aren't going to be available to the people that are going to need to rely on something like that because the machines are going to be doing them.
Yeah, you're not wrong. The automation was already taking jobs at insane pacing. You go to a McDonald's, you go to a lot of fast food places, and the Taco Bell would be another one that I remember going to recently. And you go right to a kiosk, you type your order in, it prints off a receipt. If you're going to pay with cash, then they collect your cash, and then they give you your order. There isn't, like you said, there's no cashiering job. Walmart's the same thing. Target's got a big emphasis on the self checkouts. And other than my kids enjoying it for the fun factor, when you're just a kid, it's fun to ring things up. But I personally don't like them. I would rather go to a cashier, because if you have a problem, you have something that doesn't have a barcode, I mean, it can be a hassle. It can actually slow you down, depending on how much you're buying. We go and buy quite a lot of stuff at Walmart or Target, and it's like, if you run into an issue and you got to wait for, that one person that's covering 5, self checkout lines, that can take a lot longer than it would have if I would have just went through and had a cashier do it, and I could have paid and been out the door. But instead, I'm standing there waiting for somebody else. Or, like I saw at Sam's Club the other day when I was walking out, that they sign a contract when you get those memberships, where you basically allow them to check your receipt when you leave. And
Okay.
they must have went through self checkout, and they had the person at the door had caught some items that were not on their receipt. And I heard it was a woman, and she was saying that, oh, it must not have scanned, or I heard it beep. She had some typical excuse, like this isn't what it looks like, kind of thing. And she seemed pretty, shaken up by it. I think that either she was getting away with it all the time, or maybe she did have an honest mistake. But regardless, I mean, the self checkouts have a lot of problems like that. Where
Well, you
they're
know what, Lap? Not to interrupt, but I just saw a headline on the news within the last week. They were showing, I think it was Walgreens, where they have to put what was it? Uh, Laundry detergent. That's what it was. Behind glass doors because the thieves were getting so bad. So, like, random items now, that was the headline. It's causing all this backup at the register because now the employees have to go unlock everything for every item because nobody can just be honest.
And not only that, but it even goes a step further, in that those items that are locked up in the cages, a lot of times people that are doing inventory are finding that there are empty boxes inside of those cages, where employees, they're thinking it was employee theft in the particular story I was looking at. But there was a dozen or so empty boxes of high-end electronic items, and
Wow.
they all disappeared. But when you've got, like you
Wow.
said,
That smells like an inside job.
For sure, for sure. But I mean, I can't blame these places for not catching it. Even when you're already short staffed, you have to rely on your coworkers to be doing their job at least to an adequate level. You don't have time to check somebody else's work. That I can't even put that on. The asset protection is chasing people around the store with detergent. They're not looking at other employees anymore. Like when things are good, assets protection works, and I think that whole system is pretty good. But when you've got the kind of theft that retail has been putting up with for months, actually years, it's just crazy. Like that's got to give. That's just going to push inflation up even faster. In fact, that could be part of why that we're seeing record inflation is that
Mm-hmm.
the reporting is just not happening because it's not being reported because these stores don't want to be called out for being the R word, as far as the people that sometimes commit crimes follow a certain profile.
Yeah.
And so there is a ton of emphasis not to report that stuff at all, especially if it's going to make you look bad. So they're going to just eat those losses today. But sooner or later, when somebody that's above them looks at the bottom line and says, why is your store, losses, at this level when you were here last year and the year before it was, 50% less, like something's got to give profits. It's going to look real scary when, like you said, that entire store is locked up. I think that the days are coming where we're going to have escort shopping only, or you'll have to do the Instacart type stuff where they just come out and load it in your car because the amount of theft is just going to make it impossible for brick and mortar stores to survive.
Well, one of my famous or favorite post-apocalyptic shows, Mad Max, is I think it's about to come true, Lep. I mean, if you look at what's happening with like Agent said show, like on every show, how Russia and China are making a new reserve backed currency. I just read an article 2 days ago validating that exact plan. Putin was given a speech just talking about all the benefits of it, and it sounds amazing, and it sounds like it will work for the East, which sets us, the West, back in more ways than one. So not only will, the stores be locked up tight, but our money's not going to be worth much. So it's going to be like barter town, dude. We're going to be rolling into these little barter towns on our, like, EV bikes. I don't know, but it doesn't look good.
No, it does not look good at all. I do think you're right that there are parts of Mad Max that are going to come true, and the parts that may not come true may just happen outside of our lifetime.
Well, all these post-apocalyptic flicks, I'm thinking Resident Evil, I'm thinking Mad Max, they all like take place in deserts. Tupac and Dr. Dre's California Love music video, post-apocalyptic, in a desert, Thunderdome. Are
Yeah,
we seeing a trend, Lep? A forecasted trend?
I think so.
Not to be,
I think so. I think it's going to get real scary real soon. And I don't know, like I said, if we're going to see like straight up the most recent Mad Max film, the Fury one. I forget the name of it, but
that
uh,
was intense.
yeah, there's parts of that that are already coming true. I mean, the way that people are so incredibly polarized and everybody is in sort of an us or them mode, like we're already there in some respects. And the mentality that I think some people already harbor is the mentality of that show. You know, Look at all the countries around us that are collapsing. We
Yeah,
had, go ahead,
right?
jump in if you want to. Like, I mean, you
Well,
see,
no, yeah, you're right. You're nailing it. It is happening on. I'm seeing headlines in other countries that mimic the exact events that are happening here. I think it's the UK at like a 9.1% inflation rate, just like over here. Oh, that's odd.
yep, and look at all these countries that have recently. What's that island nation off the coast of Africa?
Sri Lanka,
Yeah, I think so. Where they
they're in
overthrew.
like total rebellion.
Yeah, they overthrew the president's mansion. And they're
Yes.
all, they got the videos where they're, swimming in the pool and getting their first meal in days. Like, so just because we're insulated from that today doesn't mean that tomorrow won't be coming to our doorstep.
That's what I'm worried about, Lep, and I've been trying to tell people for months. And I've been saying Sri Lanka for months, but I've been saying Venezuela for years.
Yep.
Now, we're just on a slower ship, but I think we're on a bigger ship, kind of like a Titanic versus like their little speedboats crashing into rocks. We're the Titanic heading into this gigantic multiple layered iceberg. And the mentality that we've been raised with does not, like, we don't know what it's like to be in those situations that these populations have probably grown up for in the most part, you know,
Yeah, you're not
as
wrong.
far as struggle and civil war goes.
Well, Agent was talking about another country. I think it was in Africa. I forget which country. I wish he was here to tell us, but they've already went through genocide of like over 1 million people. That having huge mass shootings that don't get labeled the same. Like they don't get the publicity because there's religion in play. There's a lot of different variables that make it different than what America's mass events look like. But the reality is that they've been going through these issues just right alongside of us, worse in a lot of cases. But the mainstream news refuses to report on it because they want to focus on getting what they want to get across to people here. And so again, they're showing rainbows and all these distractions on the news, when meanwhile the rest of the world is burning around us in some places.
It's interesting to look at it from like a corporate perspective, right? Like you got all this power if you're the ones that own the media outlets that can sway like global populations in certain ways, but then also hide the reality of what's going on in other places. I saw this movie last Saturday. It was in Spanish. It was called, I think, like Sarah's Journal or something, but it was regarding a lady that got kidnapped in the Congo. I think it was based on a true story. Gets abducted by some like militant Congo rebels, and there's a bunch of child soldiers in it. And then, like they say, one of them they save, but then the UN won't take them, and a lot of the dialogue just makes you really realize like these kids, they just go right back into it. It's all they know, and then they become these crazy killers that commit genocide amongst the tribes. But it's just a vicious cycle, and it's like something we've never seen, we've never experienced it. We're Americans, but we've kind of like lightly seen it in movies and history books. But now, what if we live that, right? Like, think about it. That would be intense.
Well, and I really worry about you guys down in Texas because you're essentially living that whole scenario in slow motion with the open border situation. I mean, you guys
Very true.
have basically, experiencing an invasion on a daily basis, and because it's the R word in order to call it what it is, but the essentially you have an invading force from many different countries, but essentially they all coming here with the same goal, that they just want to eat, have fresh water, and live a life that they can be appreciative of, versus the genocide that they're escaping from their countries. I think some people have sincere beliefs, but I think there's a lot of gang activity. I think MS-13 is a real thing. The cartels are absolutely a real thing. We're seeing that with the drugs that are coming through. Fentanyl is taking people's lives, left and right. You hear about overdoses more and more, and they're lacing drugs. Like they're literally killing our citizens, but doing it in a way that's just so incredibly, covert, that people are just not, either they don't care or they just don't realize that it's occurring. But like if you were to take all the overdose deaths and all the people that have been hurt by illegals that don't have insurance, like them not following the rules is what's causing our inflation to go up. Like we're having, essentially we're subsidizing all these people coming in, and they say, well, they can't vote. Well, that's kind of true, but if they get an extra electoral seat and they get a congressperson, because population wise they're still considered, they're actually getting a vote in having a congressperson represent them because of where their population is residing. So they do affect the elections. They are voting, but they don't cast an individual ballot. That's the only difference. But the reality is that we're being invaded. and nobody's stopping it. Nobody cares about it. Texas governor is the only one that's done anything that's rattled some cages by, busing them up to DC, but I don't know if DC is even complaining about it. They're saying
Yeah,
that,
and he gets hated for it out here. I see it. It's weird.
yeah, they're calling him a racist, and,
Yeah.
they're just doing the most terrible things to try to smear him for doing it, but he's really the only one bringing awareness to it.
Yep.
So I feel for you, man. Like I said, I think there's a lot of people that are going to come here, they're going to work, they're going to contribute, but there's a lot of people that aren't.
Yeah, and it's getting to that point where you really gotta start buckling down, maybe get you a bug out bag ready.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to talk about that on an upcoming show. We're going to do a breakdown of what's in my bug out bag, so
I'm
you guys
excited.
have an idea of what you might want to put in yours.
Well, I wish I had some good white pills for the end of the show, but I'm really on E with those bad boys.
Yeah, I hear you. I wish there was a better white pill to give everyone too, but elections are coming. We might get a little bit of relief if we have a change out of the guard. If we get this red wave that everyone's predicting, I don't think it's going to save us. I think we're the only ones that can save us, but I do think that we can at least slow the collapse down. And maybe fix some of the more pressing issues with, the illegal immigration, the drug crisis. I'd really like to see straight up politicians legalize everything and just deal with it. We're already dealing with it, and then we're going through a drug war on top of it. Like the war on drugs, I mean, I don't think of it as that. It's a war on people, because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, people that are going to buy drugs are going to buy them, legal or illegal. And same thing with alcohol. Look at what prohibition did. Look how it tore this country apart. And it's happening in slow motion now with the war on drugs. We should just legalize everything, tax it, and put that money in a fund to help these people that do want to, come clean. They want to change their life. Great. Have those things in place to help them. Offer places where they can get clean needles if that's. I know that places like Portland have softly integrated that, and it's turned out really badly, but I think that there is a structure where you can legalize some drugs, especially marijuana. It's already legal in most states, and that would have a positive impact. Think of the stuff that you could build, the schools that you could improve, the roads that you could fix, bridges. There is some silver lining to taxing something that, because right now people are still buying it, the government's just not getting any tax for it.
Mm-hmm.
When you force people underground, it just does bad things to everyone. And the users obviously don't even know what they're buying. We're seeing all this stuff that's laced with fentanyl. I'd rather people know what they're getting and have some form of regulation, rather than people just, again, I don't feel like it's a war on drugs. I feel like it's a war on our citizens.
Yeah, it's weaponized chemicals, really. Like it's Walking
Chemical
Dead out
warfare.
there in the streets.
Yeah, you hit the nail right on the head. It's chemical warfare.
Mm-hmm. Very
But
sinister, very dark, very evil.
so I think that if we just keep plugging away at this podcast, getting our viewers prepped for what's coming, I think, like I said, the only people that are going to save you is you and your clan of family, whatever you are. You just have to prepare the best you can and try to, weather what's coming. But there are ways to get around it. Start a garden, get to work. There is still time. There are still products you can go and buy that are so cheap to buy today that would cost you so much money to grow yourself, like a 50-pound bag of rice. You cannot grow that yourself for less than, the $30 or whatever you're going to pay at a Sam's Club or Costco. So
Mm-hmm.
that's my white pill, is get out there, buy some canned food, get yourself some, buy in bulk, get that Sam's Club membership or Costco membership, and start stocking up, because even if nothing happens, you still got food to eat.
Exactly. I'll
That's all I
take
got,
that.
brother. I'll
All
take care.
right, good show.
Yeah, let's get together again in a couple days.
I'm with it.
Peace,
Profits
brother.
out.